Hey guys, welcome back to Altaz-Review, where we take a good look at all the games that came out this year, and what the situation is looking like for Game of the Year. There's been a ton of great titles and even a bunch of pretty underwhelming games, but even still, as far as the Golden Joystick Awards go, the 2024 nominees are kind of divisive, but that still leaves a lot of room for speculation for the Game Award nominees. And honestly, I feel like the Game Awards is the main event of the year. But anyways, let's take a look at all the games we have to consider for the Golden Joystick Awards and for the Game Awards. So let's get right into it. Let's start our analysis with the Golden Joystick Awards, since we pretty much know all 12 of the nominees for Game of the Year, and it's still one of the more official Game of the Year titles. In no particular order, we have Animal Well, Astrobot, Balatro, Black Myth Wukong, Black Ops 6, Dragon Age Veilguard, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Helldivers 2, Metaphor ReFantazio, Satisfactory, Silent Hill 2, and Tekken 8. Starting with Animal Well, maybe I just haven't experienced enough, but right off the bat, it doesn't feel like a Game of the Year title. It's a great puzzle experience which reminds me a lot about Outer Wilds, considering the whole mysterious goal, discovery, and the puzzle-solving nature of the game. It's also not particularly easy, but not infuriating either. In difficulty and even in just a visual representation, it's similar to Celeste, with the challenging nature but the ease of trying out new things and experimenting new tactics without taking too long to load or even losing too much progress. It's definitely not uncommon for simpler looking games to win Game of the Year, but seeing the other AAA games that were well received on this list, I say critics and players can't help but pick the more entertaining games. Had the other candidates been more mediocre, I'd say Animal Well would have a fairly easy win. Moving on, we have more titles that may have a similar problem to Animal Well, that being the lack of visual entertainment and the exciting fun that usually comes from big developers and their extensive resources to make good animation, complex systems, and interesting lore and secrets. Compared to those AAA games, the smaller studios naturally have trouble keeping up for Game of the Year. These other titles would be Balatro, which is super interesting and easy to get into, but doesn't provide much more than a basic amount of fun and time-killing potential, albeit a super addictive time killer. And then we have Satisfactory, which might fit in the same category, but also isn't too easy to get into. In fact, just starting it is the intimidating part. Just watching someone else's huge complex factory system makes you feel like the game just isn't for everyone. It doesn't matter how easy it actually is to get into, its first impression is just a little extreme. Plus, there's only a small faction of players who will continue to pour hours into a single game while ignoring every other single-player and multiplayer title. Games these days are already too long, so anyone who wants to try other games can't waste time expanding the factory after more than a few days of playing. Then we have Astrobot, which is a much stronger competitor for Game of the Year, but does still have a similar problem to Animal Well. Astrobot really bumped up the gameplay and Easter eggs, but it's still just a short, fun game, where you just enjoy yourself and look at all the amazing gameplay and innovative ideas. But it's still just a short and sweet game that gets overshadowed by the bigger, more enthusiastic titles on this list. So I don't think Astrobot has a huge chance of winning, although it still deserves a place on this list. But then let's talk about another genre that's generally a toss-up: online focused games. Starting with Helldivers 2, the game that took the world by storm for several months before slowing to a halt with the whole PSN fiasco, followed by a lack of interesting updates. Helldivers 2 stayed strong. Its first few updates, along with great social media management, made it the greatest ally for gamers, as a company that put fun as the top priority. Unfortunately, even after so many good ideas in their first few updates, they eventually ran out of things to add, while newer online games came up with little requirements in their updates. Games like Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero, and recently Black Ops 6. For this list, Black Ops 6 is the main competitor for Helldivers 2, and to me, it seems like it's a superior title simply due to longtime fans that have stuck with COD for so long and probably don't play anything else. Just this huge player count makes COD a strong candidate for Game of the Year every year. And this time, Black Ops 6 is apparently the best iteration of new-gen COD since the new Modern Warfare and Warzone releases. Black Ops 6 introduced omnidirectional movement, which is that directional jump straight out of Helldivers 2. Aside from that, it fine-tuned the other systems from COD and basically just recreated a mildly better version of the usual Black Ops guns, maps, and controls. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. No one has had a problem with the Black Ops system so far, and the quick gameplay of modern COD with the new omnidirectional jump has made a comfortable yet interesting new environment for COD fans. In comparison, Tekken 8 is the only other online focused game and the only fighter on this list. It's definitely one of the best Tekken games in history, with a bunch of fun new characters and some amazing designs for the old characters. The story and lore, which is one of Tekken's strong points, strangely enough, is even better in Tekken 8. But no matter how good it is, Tekken just isn't the type of game that takes the votes for Game of the Year and brings games together. We all love Tekken, but none of us are so committed to it that we'd call it the greatest game. After that, we have the bigger candidates, Black Myth: Wukong and Silent Hill 2. Both are standout games that came out of nowhere. Well, more like broke expectations out of nowhere. Black Myth: Wukong looked like it might be a cash grab with fake trailers, and Silent Hill 2 seemed like it might be a basic and soured version of the classic Silent Hill we love. But both these games showed us how much effort the devs put into them and how worthy they are for the Game of the Year title. I can't be sure which one deserves it more. They're both brilliant games. But it doesn't really matter, because there's a certain group of nominees that might have quality and bias on their side. My view is that RPG games are an easy pick for gamers and journalists alike, as long as they're made fairly well. The formula just works, and many people have a certain bias to such games. Even I just naturally gravitate towards RPG games. Final Fantasy has a huge fan base, and it's even bigger with Final Fantasy VII, considering that Final Fantasy fans, Final Fantasy VII enthusiasts, and even Kingdom Hearts fans enjoy the characters and the gameplay of Final Fantasy VII. Not to mention that the remake series, especially Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, is a beautiful remake and even a big improvement over Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is its first part. On the other hand, we have Metaphor ReFantasio, a JRPG from the same studio as Persona, and it shows. The style, the combat, and ideas really come together with the same maturity and creativity as Persona, but it feels like its own thing. It's a brilliant game that Persona fans and new players can appreciate. And then finally, we got a new installment for Dragon Age Veilguard, a simple but well-made RPG with solid combat, decent story, and enough quests to keep things fun. But, and I know it's a stretch, I feel like a lot of journalists are pretty biased on this Western RPG, considering that certain critics may not prefer the other Chinese and Japanese RPGs to overshadow Western AAA gaming. But that's just speculation. On a more realistic note, Veilguard is being presented as the game that will revive BioWare. And even though many people are doubtful about that, BioWare fans may give it full support just for being a not horrible game and instead exceeding expectations by being fairly nice. Overall, I'd say the RPG games have a bit of an edge in this race due to their high quality and the large number of fans behind each studio and franchise. Personally, I would prefer the title to go to either Final Fantasy Rebirth or Black Myth: Wukong. But to be fair, all the nominees on this list are pretty well deserving of the title of Game of the Year. But now finally, moving on to all the big names that didn't even make it to this list. The first thing I noticed is the lack of Nintendo titles. We've already seen how much people enjoyed Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and we just recently got Mario and Luigi Brothership, which is a bit divisive. But regardless, it feels almost necessary at this point to have a Nintendo game in the list of nominees. And I'm pretty sure Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom will be part of the list for the Game Awards. Besides that, Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero may still make the list. Although it's up against games like Tekken 8 and some of the other online shooters, Sparking Zero has a good chance of at least getting nominated as the best online experience this year. Adding to some of the technical picks, I was surprised to learn that DLCs and early access games are still eligible for the Game of the Year title. That said, I have no doubt that Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree will be in the top 6 nominees, and I really think it might win. It's a fairly large DLC, enough to compare to a full game, and all of its additions are fun and unique, bringing the fun of a unique individual game. It only adds to its chances with the huge Souls fans that love to support From Software titles. But even the early access games are probably some of the strongest competitors for Game of the Year. Hence my surprise for how they were neglected. Palworld is easily one of the best games this year, even considering the few bugs it may have being an early access game. And Hades 2 is a perfect sequel to Hades 1, which itself was a Game of the Year nominee. If DLCs and early access are eligible for a title, then I'm sure all these games deserve a chance. And even though I said all the RPG games have a really good chance of just taking the Game of the Year title, they still missed out Dragon's Dogma 2, which might just be the best RPG game this year, especially being a Western RPG. This Game of the Year feels almost like a tournament. There's no top 2 games this year. Every game has a different genre and its own pros and cons. Who's gonna take the title at the end? Who's gonna be the ultimate winner from all these different options? Will it be a fighter like Tekken or Dragon Ball Z? Will one of the shooters like Helldivers 2 or Black Ops 6 win it just like Overwatch did in 2016? What will journalists choose between the apparent bias for Whaleguard versus their apparent issue with Black Myth Wukong? In fact, Dragon's Dogma 2 is probably a better candidate than Whaleguard overall, but we can't be sure how the voting will go. But I still think that the DLC and Early Access games will make waves in this Game of the Year race, whether they compete for Game of the Year or some of the other annual titles. Either way, I'm sure we'll see what the finalists are by next week, and I can't wait to see the results. There's so much happening with the Game Awards this year, but whether it's the Golden Joystick Awards or the Game Awards, it's going to be exciting to see who wins the most titles and how these votes affect the games coming out next year. But let me know what you guys think about the Game of the Year nominees and what games you hope will win. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Until then, I hope I see you on the next video.